Hello, my name is Mark Need, and I'm going to be sharing today an essay on tritium as a strategic nuclear non-proliferation control. Nuclear weapons proliferation remains a concern for international relationships. Political hotspots around the globe have experienced the introduction of nuclear weapons into already tense situations. The Pakistan-India relationship remains tenuous even after decades of conflict. Several years ago, the introduction of nuclear weapons made the consequences of this conflict even more dangerous, not only to these two countries, but to the region and to the world. North Korea's development of nuclear weapons threatened to destabilize the Asian theater, and in particular the Korean Peninsula. And with the United States' abrogation of agreements with Iran in the Iranian nuclear weapons deal, the Tehran government is considering restarting its nuclear ambitions again. In each of these nuclear proliferation situations, the primary concern has been the acquisition and production of fissile material. Because fissile material is necessary for nuclear bombs, the focus on fissile materials makes sense. However, fissile material, once created, doesn't disappear. It remains. If it is smuggled in, it can be stored and hidden. If manufactured clandestinely, it can be stockpiled. An often overlooked yet vital component of nuclear weapons could be the 21st century focus for nuclear non-proliferation success. That is tritium. Tritium is an essential component of an advanced nuclear weapons program. Even though only 2 to 3 grams of it exist in each device, it performs a vital role. It's a nuclear reactor byproduct. It decays at a steady rate. We know a lot about it. And because of its radiological properties, tritium may be the best solution supplementing existing nuclear fissile material controls. Its short lifespan may in fact help deter countries from seeking nuclear programs while reducing enormous stockpiles of nuclear weapons in the most advanced nuclear programs. Tritium simply offers the potential to reduce the threat of nuclear proliferation. So what is tritium? Tritium is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. Normal hydrogen, as we learned in chemistry class, is 1 electron and 1 proton. Tritium, however, is 1 proton, 1 electron, and 2 neutrons for an atomic weight of roughly 3 AMU, hence tritium. Before the 1900s, it is thought that there were around 2 to 8 tritium atoms for every 10 to the 18th hydrogen atoms, so it's definitely a trace element. It exists naturally as cosmic rays hit the upper atmosphere gases and cause spallation. It's an isotope of hydrogen, so it chemically reacts like hydrogen. It can form tritiated water, 3H2O. It has a radioactive half-life of 12.4 years, which is important to understanding tritium and why it can be used in nuclear non-proliferation. There are civilian uses for tritium, but this essay is not going to go into those uses, but there are uses for it. Of most interest for this essay is that only 400 grams per year of tritium is used commercially. It is not something that is used commercially because it's very expensive, selling at around $30,000 per gram. Because of this, tritium is something that primarily is used in nuclear weapons. As you learned in your nuclear engineering classes at Purdue University, the first nuclear weapons were gun-type and implosion-type fission warheads. And as such, they basically do a very simple fissile reaction, a fissile fuel reaction. They create fusion from a neutron flux acting on the fissile material. As the fissions grow exponentially, they release. After about 50 to 60 generations of fissions, a large destructive release of radiation, heat, and explosive force is released. However, scientists quickly understood that instead of using a polonium-beryllium neutron initiator for the implosion device, they could in fact put a tritium-deuterium neutron initiator inside. This would, when the plutonium is slammed and shrunk and the density increases and the shock wave is creating heat, all that's going on, it creates pressure and heat inside this small little chamber that has 2 to 3 grams of tritium and deuterium. In that moment, fusion begins, and neutrons that are of a very high energy are produced. This is significant because these neutrons interact with plutonium-239, and not only is this creating its own set of neutrons, but as these high energy neutrons interact with the plutonium, they create fission. But this high energy neutron creates a high energy fission where the plutonium, instead of releasing only 2.9 on average neutrons per reaction, it releases 4.6. Thus, more fission is created from the very start, and more fissions are created from each plutonium fission in the bomb. It has been noted that the early bombs would have around 1 to 20 kilotons of explosive power, but a boosted fission bomb using tritium could achieve anywhere from 100 to 200, 300, 400 kilotons. Thus, the explosive power was multiplied anywhere from 10, 15, 20 times its original power. This makes tritium a vital component of a nuclear weapons program. This boost to the device is what the second stage of most program entails. First is developing a fission weapon with fissile material. The second is using the tritium to create a highly boosted, high-yield weapon. Tritium is also important for advanced nuclear programs because the deuterium-tritium fusion reaction allows you to have a smaller warhead with higher yield. This is important for delivery vehicles, for ICBMs, and things of that nature where payload weight is an essential factor for delivery performance. Thus, tritium is an essential component of any nuclear weapon state. And even though it's maybe not as important seemingly as the plutonium, if your political goal is to have a weapon of deterrence, a weapon of mass destruction, then you need something that has an extraordinarily high yield, and the tritium is able to take the plutonium and the uranium and create a device with immense power. So how is tritium made? There are two primary ways in which tritium is produced today. The first are heavy water reactors. The second is lithium-6. Heavy water reactors such as the CANDU reactor have deuterium oxide as their primary moderator. We call this heavy water. It has a concentration of around 99% deuterium oxide, and when neutrons strike the deuterium oxide, the heavy water, every once in a while a tritium gas is formed in the heavy water. Over time, this gas builds up, and for safety reasons, the tritium is processed out of the heavy water in the reactor periodically. This cleaning of the heavy water provides a substantive amount of tritium for commercial use. Ontario Hydro, the largest producer of commercial tritium in the world, can extract 2.5 kilograms of tritium per year for commercial use, which is over 6 times that the entire globe uses. The second way that tritium can be produced is from lithium. An isotope of lithium, lithium-6, when bombarded with neutrons, produces tritium. Lithium-6 became an important component of tritium production because tritium decays at 5.5% per year. Thus, a steady stream of tritium production was necessary not only to produce nuclear boosted fission, but also to maintain it, as it would decay and needed to be refilled. It was also found that lithium-6, when combined with deuterium, forms lithium deuteride, which, when under neutron bombardment, releases tritium gas and deuterium gas. This was part of the technological advancement that allows the fusion bomb, where a primary core, a boosted device using plutonium and tritium, ignites, causing a neutron bombardment of a lithium deuteride core, secondary core, that's wrapped around plutonium. As the first core, primary core detonates, it creates tremendous heat and pressure and neutron flux, causing a fusion reaction in the second stage. For this reason, it becomes evident that tritium is important not only with boosted weapons, but with fusion weapons as well. The tritium production then becomes an essential stage of an advanced nuclear arms program. Despite tritium not being a focus of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, it has become a focus as of late because of its importance for advanced nuclear weapons programs. The NPT focuses on fissile materials and is the main binding legal document in the world today. It is where enforcement happens, where safeguards and monitoring all occur, and helped begin the formation of the IAEA. Tritium is a nuclear weapons material that is not regulated, again, by the NPT, and it's not considered an illegal trade material, or it's not illegal to produce in any international treaty, even though it's an essential and limiting component to any viable nuclear weapons program in the contemporary global framework. It's unlikely that an amendment to the NPT will take place soon, and as such, the European Union is adding tritium controls in a new nuclear proliferation treaty, marking the first large agreement tying tritium production sales with oversight and verification. The September 2017 North Korean weapons test was of a magnitude indicating that the DPRK had acquired tritium and reached the technical acuity to use the material successfully in boosting a fission device. This test highlighted the urgency and the importance of tritium being considered in new non-proliferation treaties. The country of North Korea presents a timely focus for the horizontal proliferation of tritium in nuclear weapons. North Korea signed the NPT in 1985 and accepted verifications and safeguards in 1992. However, by the time the IAEA arrived with safeguards, there was international concern that was focused on the DPRK's reactors and the likelihood of plutonium production from them. The United States pushed the North Korean government to cease plutonium production, which some believe was successful. In 2002, the Bush administration, in accordance with its bellicose policies toward Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, accused the DPRK of restarting its uranium enrichment program. Whether correct or not, this pushed the North Korean government beyond a level it was willing to accept, and the DPRK openly entered a path of IAEA non-compliance. It restarted its plutonium production program, and it withdrew from the NPT. Within a few years, in 2005, North Korea would announce that it had nuclear weapons just before the start of the NPT review conference. Gershom and Huntley argue that the 2002 agreed framework collapse was a critical watershed because the United States pushed North Korea into a corner but failed to back up the strong-arm diplomatic tactics. Thus, the DPRK left the treaties with a stronger hand. It shifted the line in the sand, and having crossed the lines that it had agreed to stay within, it was now in a position to renegotiate a deal beyond where it had been before. Furthermore, the North Koreans developed more technology and pushed the envelope further, causing inspections and safeguards to become more difficult. The DPRK would likely be forced into concessions of verification that it itself was unwilling to accept in terms of international access to its country, its reactors, and its facilities. With harsh diplomacy forcing their hand, the difficult and intrusive inspections pending, and bellicose language and actions from the United States, North Korea decided to move forward with the program despite the risks. Factoring into this decision most likely was also the timing of a U.S. invasion in Afghanistan and Iraq and its deep entrenchment in both countries. Thus, North Korea used this moment to restart a path toward a nuclear deterrent. In 2006, North Korea detonated what was likely a fizzle. At a regular schedule, however, the DPRK would continue testing nuclear weapons, and it would continue repeating these weapons at about a 3 to 4 year clip. Until in 2006, the tests changed. They became stronger, more powerful. They claimed that they had detonated a microfusion device. Many doubted because it seemed so small. However, according to some experts, the low yield might in fact verify the test as a low-yield boosted fission device. In 2016, another test was achieved, followed by a much larger test 1 year later. The 2017 test was somewhere between 100 and 250 kilotons, thus proving that they had mastered the use of tritium technology in boosting their fission warheads. No longer was North Korea a small nuclear power player, it was an advanced nuclear program. Once the North Koreans established the acquisition and successful detonation of fissile material, it was inevitable that they took the step of creating weapons of a larger magnitude through the use of deuterium-tritium reactions. Thus, tritium acquisition and use become the stepping stones to weapons significant enough to stop testing having proven higher nuclear capabilities. The political point was made. North Korea is an advanced nuclear power with capability of manufacturing all necessary components of their weapons for production and maintenance. North Korea is an example of horizontal nuclear proliferation, and it is also an example of the dangers of unregulated tritium production. While dangerous as a nuclear power, the DPRK gains political and military power through obtaining boosted fission and fusion technology available only through the development of tritium. In light of this, it is necessary to evaluate the suspected development of the North Korean tritium production. North Korea began a path of tritium production earlier than their public testing. Initial concern was DPRK's gas graphite reactor at Yongbyon. However, it's been proven that this likely produced any measurable amount of tritium for the nuclear program. Most likely is the pool-type 5 megawatt IRT research reactor at the Yongbyon complex. As recent as the 1990s, North Korea had obtained high-enriched uranium from the Soviets. However, by 2011, most of this fuel was spent. They converted the reactor to an LEU burning unit and were able to use the uranium rods in place for this reactor. It is thought that they used this reactor for lithium-6 neutron bombardment to create the lithium. This has, in fact, been somewhat verified by the fact that around the same time, lithium production was begun in North Korea. The lithium production in North Korea was found through not only the facility that they knew to be lithium production, but the fact that they were procuring tons and tons of lithium hydroxide and mercury, which is used in fact to separate lithium-7, the most abundant part of natural occurring lithium, from the lithium-6, which is used for the tritium. So having a lithium production facility with the right processing capabilities and materials was a clear sign that the North Koreans were in fact creating tritium from lithium. The North Korea example offers us a path of horizontal proliferation typical of all nuclear powers. The initial development of fissile material and the technology to detonate a fission device is the first step. However, the primary goal of a nuclear weapons program is diplomatic and military, and it is achieved only with high yields made possible by the use of deuterium-tritium fusion reactions. The NPT and the international community initially focused on the highly enriched uranium and the plutonium. By stopping a non-nuclear state from acquiring fissile material and fissile material production, it was thought that proliferation of nuclear weapons technology could be averted. However, in hindsight, this was short-sighted and fails to address the weakest link of a sustained nuclear weapons program, which is in fact tritium production. Verification and safeguards for tritium and lithium-6 have largely fallen outside the NPT and other proliferation treaties. While the IAEA may see and discuss tritium as evidence of a nation's intentions, nations can still import, export, and produce the material legally. The prevention and sanction of tritium and lithium production technologies should be tools of modern treaties to make the second step of nuclear weapons development more difficult. Currently, the major hurdle for nuclear weapons development is the fissile material. Once that red line has been crossed, the perception is that a country is naturally on a path toward developing more and bigger weapons. Thus, horizontal proliferation deterrence hinges on one red line. Focusing on tritium production, however, offers a second hurdle and another line assisting the international community in deterrence. While it is true that acquiring tritium production means that all that is easier than acquiring fissile material, the tritium must stay in production due to its 5.5% decay rate. This allows the international community to continue applying pressure through sanctions strategically and with the present cause. Tritium is still being produced. Therefore, sanctions will remain in place. Once fissile material is produced and stockpiled, there has been a tendency from the international community to move on and sanctions begin to slide. Often rewards are given for the stopping of production, even though these fissile stockpiles can exist indefinitely. Sanctions on continued tritium production presents a burden for the fledgling nuclear power because continued tritium production is essential for the weapon. The idea of continued heavy economic sanctions from tritium production presents another cost in the calculus of nuclear weapons. Tritium safeguards offer another powerful tool in the deterrence of nation-states attempting nuclear weapons. The production of tritium at nuclear weapons production levels is relatively easy to follow. A report from the Australian Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office discussed the tritium trail, suggesting that whether it's through lithium-6 or through heavy water, tritium can be detected as it is manufactured and as it is stockpiled. It is not very easy to hide the tritium that is taken out of heavy water reactors or the tritium that is produced from the lithium-6 refinement, as is evidenced by, even in a closed society, we were able to track North Korea's lithium-6 to tritium production. As such, because the tritium is an essential component of advanced nuclear weapons programs and it is something we can track, it becomes a source by which we can safeguard and add controls to nuclear weapons programs. And unlike fissile material, tritium can't be stockpiled indefinitely, and so nation-states must have a long-term plan of production for the tritium, which allows the international community to look for these facilities, this production, and the materials used. Although most non-proliferation discussions rest at the horizontal proliferation level, the aim is to prevent more countries having nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons programs. However, vertical non-proliferation is the aim to prevent countries from having more nuclear weapons. Hence, vertical non-proliferation is obviously a concern regarding the current nuclear weapon states. During the heights of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union possessed tens of thousands of nuclear warheads each. While these nations were not openly assisting the horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons technology, they were actively building nuclear stockpiles in numbers that truly boggled the imagination. In the case of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States threatened each other through nuclear mutually assured destruction by building more and more and more warheads of greater variety and greater yield. While horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons creates a risk of many nations having weapons, vertical proliferation also creates a risk of a few nations having many weapons. Both proliferation scenarios create a different but ample danger to the future of humanity. The United States presents an excellent example of vertical proliferation state. Furthermore, it's also at a crossroads in regard to its nuclear stockpiles and tritium production. This unique position offers opportunities to explore how advanced nuclear states' vertical proliferation might be diminished through tritium production and control treaties. The United States' peak warhead count was at over 30,000 warheads in the early 1970s. At around 2 to 3 grams per warhead average, that's 75 kilograms of tritium. Assuming that no new warheads were built, that would be a 5-year maintenance schedule of replacing 18.8 kilograms of tritium every 5 years, just to sustain the nuclear stockpile. This estimate actually falls below the Savannah River tritium production and stockpile estimates in the 1960s by half. For example, in 1972, the SRP produced 61 kilograms of tritium with only an inventory increase of 3 kilograms. This would be an estimated usage cost of $1.7 billion for tritium that year alone. The infrastructure to manufacture and maintain that much tritium is enormously expensive. Assuming today's costs, this would reflect a total infrastructure cost, the price of the tritium, and its replenishment material for those 5 years would be around $3 billion. This level of nuclear armament expense was untenable, and it is thought to help lead to the USSR's economic collapse as it tried to compete with the United States defense spending. So while the two greatest nuclear superpowers were able to achieve high levels of vertical proliferation, the expenses of development and the maintenance of the warheads were untenable long term. This, maybe even more so than getting rid of the nuclear weapons, brought both powers to the START treaty discussions in the 1980s and ratification in the 1990s, allowing the United States to greatly diminish its nuclear forces as the Soviets did the same. As the United States was drawing down its nuclear forces, decisions regarding tritium production were being forced upon its leadership. The nuclear reactors used for tritium production were poor designs, they were aging, and generally unsafe. They were shut down in 1988, leaving the U.S. with no military tritium production capabilities. However, as the START I treaty was drawing down the U.S. arsenal to just under 8,000 warheads, the tritium stockpile could grow from dismantling the older weapons. As arms reduction talks continued, U.S. tritium supplies were boosted by the influx of existing tritium weapon reserves. In 1993, the Government Accounting Office announced that the tritium supplies could last until 2012. Some estimates said 2025. The United States Department of Energy created a plan to use commercial reactors to generate tritium, which was the first mingling of U.S. civilian nuclear power and U.S. nuclear weapons program production. This controversial concept took the aforementioned process of lithium-6 transformation to tritium, and they put it in a reactor in a technology called a TP bar, which is tritium-producing burnable absorber rods. But it's basically, essentially the lithium-6 transformation. However, in 2010, in a report to Congress, it revealed that from 2003 to 2010, that in fact these TP bars were releasing high levels of tritium into the reactor moderator and coolant beyond levels acceptable to the U.S. NRC. While there were classified stockpiles of tritium, the loss of tritium production created a crisis of national defense infrastructure. While further arms talks have resulted in even lower weapon stockpiles, the reserves were at risk of falling short until a particle accelerator or other option could be established. Interestingly enough, later research indicated that the tritium permeation was not as severe as first thought, and the program limped along. In 2016, the DOE took another review and determined that less tritium was in fact needed to be produced, and further decreased the amount of tritium permeating the Watts bar reactor coolant. This crisis of tritium production in the United States illustrates the precarious infrastructure and supply chain of nuclear weapons programs. For nearly 4 decades, the United States has wrestled with the best and efficient practices for tritium production for nuclear weapons. The timing of this production issue came at a moment when the stockpile of tritium was growing from dismantled weapons. Now, it can be argued that this either helped or maybe even hurt the decision-making process, as it allowed leaders to, quote, kick the can down the road for several years. However, those several years allowed an exploration of cheap, viable tritium production at a changing demand capacity. The tritium demand is lower than it has been for several decades, as the United States has only 1,400 warheads active, with roughly 5,000 on standby. However, despite the concern of tritium production and the dismantling of weapons, the United States and Russia still hold 90% of estimated nuclear weapons, according to a 2019 survey. The United States is considering further nuclear weapons reductions to modernize its nuclear weapons forces. With the right leadership, the United States has been in an economic and production position to restart arms talks with Russia regarding the production of tritium and a nuclear force-limiting agent. By reducing tritium production for both sides, these countries would by necessity have to retire part of their stockpile. Furthermore, dismantling retired weapons could become a great issue for each state as they maximize their tritium stores. Thus, concerns of vertical and horizontal proliferation would be addressed simultaneously. With proactive and forward-thinking leadership, the United States could begin another great movement in the non-proliferation movement through tritium controls that would serve as an example for all states, negating the common but accurate refrain that there is a gap of enforcement between the nuclear haves and have-nots. For years, Russia has been amenable to nuclear arms reductions for its own cost savings reasons. Because of this current, less than optimal tritium production for the United States, it is an appropriate time to reduce military spending and reduce nuclear weapons by significant amounts. Worsening relations with Russia may stand as an impediment. However, they may also serve as a catalyst for both sides negotiating arms reductions, which might lead to, eventually, a more positive relation in the long run. In any event, it is in the United States' best interest to use this moment to think strategically about nuclear arms reductions and cutting military spending. Tritium controls and safeguards are an effective parallel path alongside fissile material and warhead controls for scaling back vertical proliferation. It is in the best interest of the United States and, in fact, the international community for the creation of a new nuclear weapons material treaty that incorporates fissile material control and regulation as well as tritium production simultaneously. Using a framework similar to the NSG, countries can agree multilaterally on how best to navigate materials controls. To stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons both horizontally and vertically, a clear break in production of both fissile material and tritium is necessary. Because the modern nuclear weapon requires both the fissile core and the DT neutron initiator, it is necessary for a more robust and deliberate arms treaty able to stop both initial development and advancement in a nuclear weapons program. Dual controls and limits give a multi-pronged limitation strategy to countries trying to develop nuclear weapons programs, and it gives added deterrence once a program breaks through the initial fission weapon threshold. Furthermore, the controls and limits on tritium production would continue the disarmament of vertically proliferated states such as the United States or Russia. Tritium is too vital of a component of the nuclear weapon to not use as leverage vis-a-vis the nuclear weapons programs. It is vital that new treaties are formed and recognize this reality.